Ethan adjusted the strap of his worn backpack as he stepped into the airplane, his daughter's small hand tightly wrapped around his fingers. Lily looked around with wide, curious eyes, taking in everything: the soft lighting, the neat rows of seats, the quiet hum of people already settled in. To her, it was all an adventure. To Ethan, it was another long day he had to get through. "Stay close," he said gently, glancing down at her with a soft smile. "I am," she replied, her voice bright, though she was already distracted by the window seats they were passing. People noticed them almost immediately. Not loudly, not openly, but in the small ways people tend to judge without speaking. Ethan's clothes were clean but clearly worn. His shoes had seen better days. His jacket didn't quite match the rest of his outfit. And Lily, though cheerful, was carrying a stuffed toy that looked like it had been stitched back together more than once. They didn't look like they belonged in business class. Ethan noticed the looks, of course. He always did. But he had learned a long time ago not to react. He simply focused on finding their seats. "Here we are," he said, stopping beside a pair of seats near the middle of the cabin. Lily climbed in first, immediately pressing her face close to the window. "We're so high already," she said, even though the plane hadn't moved yet. Ethan chuckled quietly and placed their small bag under the seat. He moved carefully, like someone used to making sure nothing went wrong. Every motion had purpose, fast but gentle. Across the aisle sat a man who seemed to belong perfectly in this space. His suit was sharp, his watch expensive, his posture confident. He was scrolling through his phone with a slight frown, as if even being here was a minor inconvenience. He glanced up when Ethan and Lily settled in. His eyes paused for just a second too long. Then he leaned slightly toward the man sitting next to him and murmured something under his breath. The other man smirked faintly. Ethan didn't hear the exact words, but he didn't need to. He had heard enough versions of the same tone before. Lily, unaware of any of it, turned toward him. "Can I have my juice?" "Not yet," Ethan said softly. "Wait until we're in the air, okay? But I'm thirsty now." He smiled patiently. "Just a little wait." She sighed dramatically, then nodded. "Okay." The man across the aisle glanced over again, this time more openly. His expression carried a mix of annoyance and disbelief, like he couldn't quite understand how the situation had happened. Ethan ignored him. A flight attendant walked by, offering a polite smile. Ethan returned it with a nod, his attention already shifting back to Lily, who had started swinging her legs lightly against the seat. "Feet still," he whispered gently. "Sorry," she said, though she was smiling. The man across the aisle let out a quiet breath, clearly irritated by even that small movement. As passengers continued boarding, the cabin filled with soft chatter. Laptops were opened, drinks were served, and the calm rhythm of a premium flight began to settle in. Ethan leaned down to check their bag again, making sure everything was within reach. Snacks, tissues, Lily's toy, a small book. He always prepared for everything. Lily tugged at his sleeve. "Are we going to fly through clouds?" "Yes," he said. "Lots of them." "Will it be bumpy?" "Maybe a little." "Will it be scary?" He looked at her for a moment, then smiled. "Not if you hold my hand." She grinned and leaned against him. Across the aisle, the man in the suit watched this quietly, his expression unreadable. But after a moment, he leaned again toward his seatmate. "Unbelievable," he muttered, just loud enough to be heard this time. "They really let anyone sit here now." His seatmate gave a small chuckle. Ethan's hand paused for a fraction of a second. He had heard it clearly, but instead of reacting, he simply picked up Lily's book and opened it. "Want me to read?" he asked. She nodded eagerly. And just like that, the moment passed, at least on the surface. The plane doors closed soon after. The safety demonstration began, and Lily watched with intense focus, mimicking some of the hand gestures. Ethan noticed and smiled faintly. "You're paying attention better than most people here," he whispered. "I'm learning," she said proudly. He nodded. "That's good." The engine started to hum louder as the plane prepared for takeoff. The vibration ran gently through the floor, a steady, familiar feeling. Lily grabbed his hand without saying anything. Ethan held it firmly. Across the aisle, the suited man shifted in his seat, adjusting his cufflinks. He glanced once more at Ethan and Lily, then looked away, clearly uninterested in anything that didn't fit his idea of order. As the plane began to move, Lily squeezed Ethan's hand tighter. "It's okay," he said softly. "Just like a bus, but in the sky." She laughed a little at that. The plane picked up speed, the noise growing louder, until finally it lifted off the ground. Lily gasped, "We're flying." Ethan nodded, watching her reaction more than anything else. For a brief moment, his face softened completely. The tiredness, the weight he carried, it all faded behind a quiet kind of happiness. But the calm didn't last long. A few minutes into the flight, as the plane leveled out, Lily remembered her juice. "Now?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, then reached into the bag. "Carefully," he said, handing it to her. She nodded seriously, but as children often do, her focus drifted too quickly. As she turned slightly to look out the window again, her elbow bumped the cup. The juice tipped. It spilled, not everywhere, but enough to matter. A small splash landed on Ethan's sleeve. A few drops reached the edge of the seat beside them, and one unfortunate drop landed near the aisle. The man across from them immediately pulled his foot back. "Seriously?" he said sharply, his voice no longer quiet. Lily froze. I didn't mean to," she whispered. Ethan quickly grabbed tissues, his movements calm and efficient. "It's okay," he told her gently. "Accidents happen." But the man wasn't done. "This is exactly what I mean," he said, not even trying to lower his voice now. "This isn't a playground." A few nearby passengers glanced over. Ethan kept his focus on cleaning. "I've got it," he said calmly. The man let out a short laugh. "I'm sure you do." Lily's eyes began to water. Ethan noticed immediately. He paused, then looked at her instead of the mess. "Hey," he said softly. "Look at me?" She did. "It's okay," he repeated. "No big deal. But I spilled it. And we cleaned it," he said gently. "Problem solved." She nodded slowly, though she still looked upset. Ethan finished wiping everything down, then handed the used tissues to the flight attendant who had come over to check. "Thank you," he said quietly. She gave him a reassuring smile. "It happens all the time." The man across the aisle shook his head slightly, clearly unconvinced. Ethan leaned back in his seat, pulling Lily a little closer so she felt safe again. "Next time, we hold it with two hands," he whispered. She managed a small smile. "Okay." The cabin settled again, but something had shifted. The air felt heavier. The quiet judgments were no longer hidden. They had taken shape, been spoken out loud. Ethan stared ahead for a moment, his expression calm but distant. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. Just used to it. Lily rested her head against his arm, slowly relaxing as the hum of the plane filled the silence. Outside the window, clouds stretched endlessly, soft and bright under the sunlight. Inside, the distance between people felt much sharper. And across the aisle, the man in the suit adjusted his seat, still convinced he was right about everything he had said. He had no idea how wrong he was. But for now, Ethan said nothing. He simply sat there, holding his daughter's hand, waiting for the rest of the journey to unfold. The cabin slowly returned to its usual rhythm after the small incident. The quiet hum of the engines filled the air, mixed with soft conversations and the occasional clink of cups. Most people went back to their own worlds, laptops, headphones, or simply resting with their eyes closed. Ethan sat still, one arm resting gently around Lily. She had calmed down, her earlier worry fading as quickly as it had come. Children moved on fast. It was one of the things he admired most about her. "You okay now?" he asked softly. She nodded against his arm. "Yeah." "Good," he said, brushing a loose strand of hair away from her face. For a few minutes, things were peaceful. Then the voice from across the aisle broke it again. "You'd think people would prepare before bringing kids into a place like this," the suited man said, not even pretending to keep it private this time. His seatmate gave a low chuckle. Some people don't think that far ahead. Ethan heard every word. He kept his eyes forward. Lily didn't seem to fully understand, but she sensed something. She shifted slightly, her small hand tightening around his sleeve. Ethan gave her hand a gentle squeeze back, a quiet way of saying everything was okay, even when it wasn't. The man across the aisle leaned back, stretching his legs slightly. It's not about being rude, he continued, as if explaining something important. It's about standards. There's a certain level expected here. Ethan let out a slow breath, still choosing silence. Not because he didn't have anything to say, but because he knew saying something wouldn't change anything. Instead, he turned slightly toward Lily. "Want to play a game?" he asked. Her face brightened instantly. "What game?" "I'll describe something," he said, "and you guess what it is?" She nodded eagerly. "Okay." He thought for a moment. "It's big. It flies. It has wings. And we're inside it right now." Lily giggled. "That's easy. It's the airplane." "Correct," he said with a small smile. Across the aisle, the man shook his head again, clearly irritated. Not just by the earlier spill, but now by the simple sound of a child enjoying herself. Ethan continued anyway. "Next one," he said. "It's white, soft, and looks like cotton in the sky." "Clouds," Lily said quickly. "Exactly." She grinned, proud of herself. The game went on for a few minutes. Simple and light. It wasn't loud, it wasn't disruptive, but was enough to remind anyone nearby that they weren't alone. And for the man across the aisle, that seemed to be the problem. He leaned slightly toward Ethan this time, his voice controlled but sharp. "Some people are trying to work." Ethan finally turned his head. His expression was calm, not defensive. "We're keeping it quiet," he said. The man raised an eyebrow. "That's your idea of quiet?" Ethan held his gaze for a second, then simply nodded once and turned back. The conversation ended there, but the tension didn't. Lily looked up at him. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked in a small voice. Ethan's expression softened immediately. "No," he said, "not at all. But he sounds angry." "That's his problem," Ethan replied gently. "Not yours." She studied his face, as if trying to understand more than the words. Then she nodded slowly. Ethan reached for the seat pocket and pulled out a small coloring book along with a few crayons. "Let's do this instead," he said. Her mood lifted again. As she began coloring, carefully staying within the lines, Ethan leaned back slightly. His eyes moved briefly toward the window, then back to her. He stayed alert, always watching, always making sure she was okay. A flight attendant passed by again, offering drinks. Ethan declined politely. Lily looked up. "Can I have water?" He smiled. "Yes, water is safe." The attendant handed her a small bottle with a kind smile. "Here you go." "Thank you," Lily said, holding it carefully this time with both hands. Ethan gave a small nod of appreciation. The moment felt normal again. But across the aisle, the man was still watching. Not openly now, but enough to show he hadn't let it go. After a while, Lily stopped coloring and looked out the window again. The sky had changed slightly. The bright sunlight was softer now, and the clouds stretched endlessly below them. "Daddy," she said, "how does the plane stay up?" Ethan glanced at her, then followed her gaze out the window. "Well," he said, choosing his words simply, "the wings are shaped in a special way. When the plane moves fast, air goes over and under them differently." She frowned slightly, trying to picture it. "The air on top moves faster," he continued, "and the air below pushes up. That helps lift the plane." Lily blinked. "So the air is holding us?" "In a way," he said. "Yes." She looked impressed. "That's cool." Ethan smiled faintly. The man across the aisle let out a quiet scoff. "That's not exactly how it works," he said, inserting himself into conversation without invitation. Ethan looked at him again. "It's a simple explanation," Ethan replied calmly. "It's an incorrect one," the man said, crossing his arms. "But I guess it sounds good to a kid." Lily looked confused now. Ethan paused for a moment. Then he said, "It's enough for her to understand for now." The man shook his head. "People pretending to know things. It's always the same." There was a slight edge in his voice now, more than before. Ethan studied him briefly. Then he said nothing. He turned back to Lily instead. "Want another question?" he asked. She nodded, though her energy had dipped slightly. As the minutes passed, the cabin lights dimmed a little. Some passengers closed their window shades. Others leaned back to rest. The overall mood shifted toward quiet again. Ethan checked the time on his watch, then adjusted Lily's seat slightly so she could be more comfortable. "You can rest if you want," he told her. "I'm not sleepy," she said. "You will be," he replied with a soft smile. She leaned against him anyway. Across the aisle, the man finally opened his laptop, typing quickly, as if trying to shut out everything around him. But every now and then his eyes flickered up, still watching, still judging. Ethan noticed, but didn't react. Instead, he reached into his bag again and pulled out a small snack. He opened it quietly and handed it to Lily. "Slowly," he reminded her. She nodded. This time, everything went smoothly. No spills, no noise, no reason for complaint. And yet, the feeling in the air didn't fully disappear. It lingered, like something waiting. Ethan leaned his head back slightly, closing his eyes for just a moment, but not fully resting, just pausing. His hand remained steady around Lily, always present, always ready. Outside, the clouds grew thicker. Inside, the calm felt fragile. And across the aisle, the man in the suit continued to believe he understood exactly who Ethan was. He had no idea how much he was missing, because beneath the quiet patience, beneath the worn clothes and simple words, there was a depth he couldn't see. And soon, whether he wanted to or not, he would. The flight had settled into a quiet rhythm that felt almost too calm. The lights were dim, the air steady, and most passengers had slipped into their own space. Some were asleep, some were working, and others were simply staring out the windows at the endless stretch of clouds below. Ethan sat still, his arm around Lily as she leaned against him. Her breathing had slowed, not fully asleep, but close to it. One of her small hands rested on his sleeve, as if she needed to make sure he was still there. He didn't move. He rarely did when she was like this. Across the aisle, the man in the suit had finally stopped talking. His laptop was open, and his fingers moved quickly over the keyboard. His face looked serious, focused, like the kind of person who always had something important to do. For a while, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the plane gave a sudden jolt. It wasn't strong enough to cause panic, but was enough to break the calm. A few passengers looked up. Lily stirred slightly. "What was that?" she murmured. "Just a little turbulence," Ethan said softly. "It's normal." She nodded, though she didn't fully understand. The plane steadied again, but only for a moment. Another shake followed, stronger this time. A few gasps came from different parts of the cabin. The overhead bins rattled lightly. The seatbelt sign turned on with a sharp sound. Lily sat up now, her eyes wide. "Daddy?" "It's okay," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Just stay seated." He reached for her hand again, holding it firmly. The turbulence didn't stop. It came in waves now, sharp, uneven movements that made the plane feel less stable than before. The calm atmosphere from earlier was gone. In its place, a quiet tension began to spread. Passengers exchanged looks. A flight attendant walked quickly down the aisle, her smile tight but controlled. "Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened," she said. Her voice was calm, but her pace wasn't. Ethan noticed that. He always noticed things like that. Across the aisle, the man in the suit closed his laptop slowly. His confident posture shifted just slightly, though he tried to hide it. Another jolt hit, this one stronger. A cup somewhere fell over, liquid spilling onto the floor. A child further back started crying. Lily tightened her grip on Ethan's hand. "I don't like this." "I know," he said quietly. "Just breathe, okay?" She nodded, trying to follow his lead. The plane dipped slightly, then leveled out again. But something felt different now. Not just the movement. Something else. Ethan's eyes moved subtly around the cabin. The flight attendants weren't just walking anymore. They were moving quickly. One of them spoke into a phone near the front, her back turned, her shoulders tense. Another passed by without making eye contact with anyone. The small details added up, and Ethan noticed all of them. The man across the aisle noticed too, but in a different way. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice no longer calm. No one answered. Another sharp drop. This time, louder reactions followed, gasps, a few raised voices. The calm was breaking. Lily leaned closer into Ethan. Is something wrong? He hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Then he said, They're handling it. Not a lie, but not the full truth either. A few seconds later, a chime sounded. Then silence. The kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. Passengers looked toward the front of the plane, waiting. Then the intercom clicked. A voice came through, but it wasn't the confident, steady tone people expected. It was different, uncertain. Ladies and gentlemen, the voice began, then paused. That pause was enough. It changed everything. Ethan's focus sharpened. We are currently experiencing some technical difficulty. The words were careful, but the hesitation behind them was clear. The cabin grew still. Even the crying child quieted, as if sensing something serious. The man across the aisle leaned forward slightly. What kind of difficulty? He muttered, more to himself than anyone else. No one answered. The intercom went silent again. Too quickly, too abruptly. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. That wasn't how updates usually worked. Something wasn't right. Another wave of turbulence hit, less violent, but still enough to keep everyone on edge. A few passengers began whispering now. The tension was no longer hidden. It was growing. Minutes passed, but they felt longer. The kind of time that stretches when people are waiting for answers. A flight attendant moved quickly toward the cockpit, knocking softly before disappearing inside. That didn't go unnoticed. Ethan followed the movement with his eyes. His mind was working now, piece by piece, detail by detail. Beside him, Lily stayed quiet, watching his face more than anything else. She trusted his reactions more than the situation. And right now, he wasn't smiling. He wasn't scared either. But he was focused, very focused. Across the aisle, the man shifted again, this time clearly uncomfortable. This is ridiculous, he said under his breath. They need to tell us what's going on. Another passenger nearby nodded nervously. Still, no official explanation came. Then suddenly, the intercom clicked again. This time, the silence before the voice felt even heavier. When the voice came, it was different, not just uncertain. Urgent. Is there anyone on board with flight experience? The words landed like a shockwave. For a moment, no one reacted, as if the sentence hadn't fully registered. Then it hit. A ripple moved through the cabin. Confusion, disbelief, fear. People looked at each other. Some laughed nervously, thinking it had to be a mistake. But no one from the crew corrected it. No one said it was fine. The voice came again, clearer this time, but still strained. Is there a pilot on board? This time, there was no misunderstanding. The question hung in the air. Heavy, real, and terrifying. The man across the aisle froze. His earlier confidence disappeared completely. What? He whispered. No one answered, because no one knew what to say. Passengers began looking around, scanning faces, hoping someone, anyone, would respond. But no one moved. No one spoke. The silence stretched. Lily looked up at Ethan, her eyes wide with confusion. What does that mean? Ethan didn't answer right away. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. Not out of fear, out of decision. His mind had already reached a conclusion. He looked toward the front of the plane, then back at Lily. For a brief moment, everything else faded. The noise, the people, the tension. It was just him and her. I need you to stay right here, he said softly. Her expression changed immediately. Where are you going? I'll be back, he said. You promise? He held her gaze for a second. Then he nodded. I promise. She hesitated, then slowly let go of his hand. Ethan stood up. The movement caught attention instantly. Heads turned. The man across the aisle stared at him, confused. You, he said, disbelief clear in his voice. Ethan didn't respond. He simply stepped into the aisle. A flight attendant saw him and rushed over quickly. Sir, please remain seated. I can help, Ethan said quietly. She paused. Something in his tone made her stop. Do you have flight experience? She asked, her voice urgent now. Ethan nodded once. That was enough. Her expression changed immediately. Come with me, she said. As they moved quickly toward the front of the plane. The entire cabin watched. Whispers spread, hope mixed with uncertainty. Across the aisle, the man leaned back slowly, his face pale now. The same man he had mocked, the same man he had dismissed, was now walking toward the cockpit. And for the first time since the flight began, he had nothing to say. The moment Ethan stepped into the front section of the plane, the atmosphere changed. The calm, controlled space of the cabin was replaced by something tighter, more urgent. The smiles from the crew were gone. Every movement felt faster, more focused. The flight attendant led him straight to the cockpit door. She knocked quickly, then opened it without waiting long. Inside, the scene was tense. One of the pilots was slumped slightly in his seat, pale and barely responsive. The other crew member in the cockpit looked overwhelmed, trying to manage too many things at once. Warning lights blinked softly across the panels. The steady rhythm of controlled flight had been replaced by a fragile balance. "This is him," the flight attendant said quickly. The crew member turned, eyes searching Ethan's face. "You're a pilot?" "I was," Ethan said. His voice was calm, but firm. "Commercial." That one word shifted everything. "How long has he been like this?" Ethan asked, already stepping closer. "Just a few minutes," the crew member replied. He started feeling dizzy then. Ethan nodded, not needing the full explanation. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's focus." There was no panic in his voice, no hesitation, just clarity. He moved into position, his eyes scanning the controls quickly but carefully. His hands didn't rush. They adjusted, checked, confirmed. The kind of movements that come from deep experience, not recent, but not forgotten either. Behind him, the flight attendant stood still, watching, hoping. The plane gave another slight shake. Ethan barely reacted. "What's our current status?" he asked. The crew member answered, his voice steadier now that someone else had taken charge. "Altitude is stable. Autopilot is still engaged, but we're not sure how long." "It's okay," Ethan said. "We'll manage." He took a slow breath. For a brief moment, something passed through his expression. Not fear, not doubt, but memory. Then it was gone. He focused again. "Let's inform the cabin," he said. "Are you sure?" the flight attendant asked. "Yes," Ethan replied. "They need to hear something steady." She nodded and moved to the intercom. A second later, Ethan's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, calm and clear, "this is Ethan speaking. I have flight experience, and I'm currently assisting in the cockpit." The effect was immediate. The tension in the cabin didn't disappear, but it changed. People listened, really listened. "The situation is under control," he continued. "We may experience some turbulence, but the aircraft is stable. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." His tone didn't rise. It didn't shake. It stayed steady. And that steadiness mattered more than anything else. Back in the cabin, Lily sat quietly, her eyes fixed toward the front. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she recognized her father's voice, and that was enough to make her feel safer. Across the aisle, the man in the suit stared ahead, his expression frozen. He had heard that voice before, just not like this, not with this kind of authority, not with this kind of calm. For the first time since the flight began, he wasn't judging. He was listening. In the cockpit, Ethan continued working, coordinating with the crew member beside him. "Let's keep communication open," he said. "Any updates, you tell me immediately." The crew member nodded. The other pilot was being attended to by another crew member now, still breathing but clearly unable to continue. Ethan didn't look back. He stayed focused forward. The instruments, the readings, the small details, everything mattered. Outside, the sky looked the same. Calm, endless. But inside the cockpit, every second counted. "All right," Ethan said after a moment. "We're maintaining course. Let's prepare for a possible adjustment if needed." The crew member followed his lead now, more confident with direction. The earlier uncertainty had faded, not completely, but enough, because someone had stepped in, and that someone knew what he was doing. Another small wave of turbulence passed through the plane. Ethan adjusted slightly, his hands steady on the controls. "You've done this recently?" the crew member asked quietly. Ethan paused for a second. Then he said, "Not in a while." That answer carried more weight than it seemed, but there was no time to explore it. "Doesn't matter," the crew member said. "You're doing great." Ethan didn't respond to that. He simply kept going. Minutes passed. Slow, careful minutes. The kind where nothing dramatic happens. But everything matters. In the cabin, the silence was different now. Still tense, but calmer. Passengers looked less panicked, more hopeful. A few even closed their eyes again, trusting the voice they had heard. Lily sat still, holding her small toy tightly. She whispered to herself, "He said it's okay." Across the aisle, the man leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. His earlier confidence was gone, replaced by something else. Realization. Piece by piece, the image he had built in his mind about Ethan was breaking apart, and in its place, something very different was forming. Back in the cockpit, Ethan checked another reading, then nodded slightly. "We're good," he said. "Let's keep it steady." The crew member let out a quiet breath of relief. "You really came at the right time," he said. Ethan didn't answer right away. Then quietly he said, "Just doing what I can." But there was more behind those words. Years of experience. Years of sacrifice. Years of choosing a different path. All of it led to this moment. Another call came in through the system. Ground communication checking in. Ethan responded clearly, professionally, giving the necessary information without hesitation. The tone of the conversation was calm, controlled, exactly what it needed to be. When it ended, the cockpit felt different. Lighter. Not safe yet, but closer. "All right," Ethan said. "We're heading in the right direction." The crew member nodded. "Thank you," he said quietly. Ethan shook his head slightly. "Let's finish this first." Back in the cabin, a quiet sense of relief was spreading. Not loud, not obvious, but there. People sat a little easier, breathed a little deeper, and waited, because now there was something they didn't have before. Someone to trust. And as the plane moved forward through the sky, steady once again, one thing became clear. The man who had been judged the most was the one holding everything together. Time moved differently after that. In the cockpit, every minute still mattered, but the pressure had shifted. The panic from earlier had settled into focus. The plane was stable now. The systems responded the way they should, and communication with the ground had become clearer. Ethan stayed in his position, his attention fixed on the controls. He didn't rush anything. Every small action was careful, measured, the kind of calm that doesn't come from luck, but from knowing exactly what to do and when to do it. Beside him, the crew member followed instructions closely. There was still concern in his eyes, but it wasn't the same kind as before. It wasn't fear anymore. It was trust. "We're clear for descent soon," the crew member said after listening to the latest update. Ethan nodded slightly. "All right, let's prepare." He adjusted a few settings, checked the readings again, and then leaned back just enough to take a slow breath. For a brief second, his eyes closed, not out of exhaustion, just a quiet moment. Then he opened them again and continued. Behind them, the other pilot was being cared for. His condition had stabilized, and that alone removed a weight from the situation. Everything was moving in the right direction. In the cabin, the mood had changed in a way that was hard to explain. People weren't talking much, but they weren't panicking either. There was a shared understanding now. Something serious had happened, but it was being handled, and most of that calm came from a voice they had heard just once. Lily sat quietly in her seat, her small hands wrapped around her toy. She looked toward the front every few seconds, as if expecting her father to walk back at any moment. A flight attendant passed by and gave her a gentle smile. "He's doing a good job," she whispered softly. Lily nodded, holding on to those words. Across the aisle, the man in the suit hadn't moved much. He sat still, his hands clasped together, his thoughts clearly somewhere else. Everything from earlier replayed in his mind. The comments, the looks, the quiet judgment he'd been so sure of. It felt different now. Not distant, not small, but heavy. He let out a slow breath and looked down for a moment. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel certain about himself. Minutes later, the intercom clicked again. Ethan's voice returned just as steady as before. "We'll be starting our descent shortly," he said. "Everything is under control. Please remain seated." That was all he said. No extra words. No dramatic tone. Just calm, simple reassurance. But it was enough. Back in the cockpit, the final phase began. "All right," Ethan said quietly. "Let's bring her down." The crew member nodded, fully focused. The plane began its gradual descent. Smooth, controlled. Outside, the clouds started to thin, and the ground slowly came into view. Ethan adjusted the controls with steady hands, his eyes moving between the instruments and the view ahead. Every small change mattered. Every detail counted. But there was no panic, just focus. As the runway came into sight, the moment grew more real. "We're lined up," the crew member said. Ethan gave a slight nod. "Let's keep it steady." The final approach was quiet. No sudden movements. No sharp corrections. Just a smooth, controlled glide. Inside the cabin, passengers sat still, many holding their breath without realizing it. Lily closed her eyes for a moment, whispering softly, "Please be okay." The wheels touched the ground. A soft but firm contact. Then the sound of the engines adjusting. The plane slowed down. And just like that, they were safe. For a second, there was silence, as if no one fully believed it yet. Then it came. Applause. Not loud at first, but growing, spreading through the cabin like a wave. Relief, gratitude, emotion. People clapped, some laughed, some wiped their eyes. It wasn't just about landing. It was about everything that had led to it. In the cockpit, Ethan exhaled slowly. His shoulders relaxed just a little. "It's done," the crew member said, a small smile breaking through. Ethan nodded once. "Yeah," he said quietly. As the plane taxied to the gate, the energy inside shifted again, this time into something lighter, something human. When the seatbelt sign finally turned off, people didn't rush to stand. They waited. They looked toward the front, because they all knew who they were waiting for. A few moments later, the cockpit door opened. Ethan stepped out. He didn't look like a hero. His clothes were still simple, his expression still calm. But the way people looked at him had completely changed. Lily was the first to move. She jumped out her seat and ran toward him. "Daddy." He smiled fully for the first time since the flight began and knelt down, catching her in his arms. "I told you I'd be back," he said softly. "You did," she replied, holding on to him tightly. The cabin watched quietly. Then the applause started again. Stronger this time. More personal. Ethan stood up slowly, still holding Lily's hand. He gave a small nod to the people around him, a simple acknowledgement, but nothing more. He didn't seek attention. He didn't need it. As passengers began to gather their things, the man in the suit remained seated for a moment longer. He watched Ethan carefully. Then, after a brief pause, he stood up and walked over. His steps were slower than before, less certain. When he reached Ethan, he hesitated for a second. Then he spoke. "I owe you an apology," he said. His voice was quieter now. No edge, no arrogance, just honesty. Ethan looked at him, calm as ever. "There's no need," he said. But the man shook his head. "There is." He took a breath. "I judged you. I didn't know anything about you, and I still acted like I did." Ethan listened without interrupting. "I was wrong," the man continued. "And today you saved everyone on this plane." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan said, "I just did what I could." "That's more than most people would do," the man replied. Ethan gave a small, polite nod. He didn't hold on to the moment. He didn't make it bigger than it needed to be. Because for him, it wasn't about proving anything. It never had been. Lily tugged at his hand. "Can we go now?" He smiled slightly. "Yeah, let's go." As they walked toward the exit, people stepped aside, giving them space. Some nodded. Some said, "Thank you." Some simply watched. The man in the suit stayed where he was, his eyes following them. This time, not with judgment, but with respect. And something else, understanding. Because sometimes it takes a moment like this to see clearly, to realize how quickly we assume, how easily we get it wrong, and how the people we overlook can turn out to be the ones who matter most. Ethan stepped out of the plane with Lily beside him, her hand in his. No spotlight, no announcement, just a quiet exit. But the impact he left behind stayed with everyone who had been there. A simple reminder: you never really know who someone is until it matters.